Hello folks, hope everyone is well and you've survived the eclipse season. Alright, so today I'm going to talk about relationships, and I'm going to talk about what I refer to as the 5 obstacles to relationships. Basically the blocks that get in the way of forming relationships and keeping relationships. I'm not going to get into dasha system here, but instead I'm going to focus on the planetary energies and how they interact in your chart. So these obstacles can, of course, lead to delays, or they can of course lead to breakdowns in serious relationships or marriage. The blocks created by the planetary placements can also lead to a positive outcome, depending on how they're being managed. So I want you to see this from the perspective of, first, where your moon sits, because that's the most important. Secondarily, from where Venus sits in your chart. And then I want you to look at it from the ascendant point of view. Yeah, so that would be third in importance. Remember, Moon and Venus are both watery planets, and we need for them to be strong to form close bonds with others. So these planets must be free from afflictions to experience happiness in relationships. So obstacle number 1, you guessed it, it's Saturn, of course. Saturn is called the Great Malefic for many good reasons. It's the darkest planet. It's also the furthest away from the sun, which gives us life. So we feel insecure where Saturn sits in our chart. And before its maturity, which is of course your late 30s, it may very well function as a shadow in the area where it sits, or the area where it's impacting, or the planet, more importantly, where that it's impacting. When Saturn is impacting the relationship planets, this can make you very distant, and it can make you detached from others. It can also lead to being with people that are much below your standards. It can bring loss of confidence in relationships, loss of esteem. It can bring relationships with people that are not good for you. It will show you limits and restrictions in relationships. It will also show you delays for getting into relationships where Saturn is. Saturn can be critical. It can be too analytical. You can imagine the worst case scenario in others and in situations pertaining to relationships. It can focus on the flaws in others. So if you have this issue in your chart, then maybe try repeating this phrase. You're okay, and I'm okay. Yeah. And now I know this sounds very simplistic, and it certainly doesn't replace a mantra that you might have that gives you results. But it really does come down to understanding this simple fact. Because that's exactly what Saturn wants you to realize. And in life, a lot of things are actually down to the simplicity. And I know it sounds more easy to say than do, but that's the challenge. If you can simplify your life and your relationships, then, I mean, that's what you really want, ultimately. Of course, the simplest things are the hardest to implement, but we can surely try. So now let's talk about obstacle number 2. Yes, the nodes are secondary. I think Saturn will present the most obstacles, and secondary perhaps Rahu. So let's talk about Rahu. Rahu creates the urge for many relationships, You'll want more and more experiences in relationships due to dissatisfaction with just about everyone. It's also going to create obsessive thoughts about others. And when you do finally get to know the person that you're obsessing about, you'll again feel just dissatisfaction. So if Rahu is afflicting Venus in some way, it can bring a lot of fantasizing about people. It can also bring about illicit affairs. When afflicting the moon, it's causing an eclipse. Again, you can't really see the person or even yourself clearly here because it's creating shadows and it impacts the mind that way, and bringing in paranoia and oversensitivity in relationships. And there's Ketu, the other half of Rahu. Where Ketu is, we are over idealizing others. No one's good enough. We look for flaws in others, particularly if it's situated near Venus or closely aspecting Venus. Ketu with the moon, of course, causes an eclipse, making one very critical, just generally. And because they're so self-critical, they begin to be critical about others around them too. These folks can also suffer from moodiness. Ketu leads us to rejection. It leads us to separation from others. It leads us to isolation. Because it rejects that which it associates with. Where Saturn may bring sorrow, pain, delays in relationships. And Rahu may bring illusion, deception, sudden attractions that come and go. Eventually they're going to give a relationship though. But with Ketu, it tends to just cut out the relationship and cause losses. And being that it's a cruel planet, it leads to losses that normally cannot be reconciled. So I've made a video actually on Rahu and Ketu in relationships, where I talk about the impact of the nodes and how it's felt in relationships, particularly if it's in the angles. So have a look at that. I'm going to place a link below of the video. Now, obstacle number 4, of course, is a fiery planet Mars. And on the other extreme, the brahmacharya, celibate planet Mars. So you have to see how it is impacting relationships. Where Mars is, you can be very uncompromising, ready to prove yourself right all the time. Maybe you're prone to a fierce temperament. Ultimately though, a powerful and dignified Mars is more interested in a principled life and simply not interested in catering to others. Hence creating relationship separation or distance. A strong Mars, of course, can also make a person think that they can do everything on their own. Again, when you're not needy, and then of course it's going to create gaps in relationship. This is especially true if a woman has a strong Mars. Mars can lead to overreacting, and it can also lead to impulsive decisions in relationship issues, which ultimately can lead to anger and fights and arguments, which lead to separation. The desire to break away is strong, especially when Mars is in the 1st and 7th house. Especially when things aren't going your way, it's your sort of impulse to break away. I mean, it's so the trick is to remember that even when you are 100% right, to perhaps take a little bit of a step back and reflect on whether risking destruction of the relationship is worth it. I know this is a very difficult thing to do if you're a Mars person, especially when you are right. This is why they say when you have a Mars affliction in your chart, when it's impacting certain relationship houses, or maybe it's too close to Venus or the Moon, that it's best to match up with someone who also has this, because then the fire gets managed and balanced out a bit more. As well, when both people have a Mars affliction in the chart, of course you shouldn't get involved in a very serious relationship, particularly marriage, before the age of 30. But also, the reason it makes sense to be with someone who has a similar affliction is that when you do get into fights and when you do get angry and you are impulsive and you want to have an argument, then the other person doesn't back away. They don't get scared off. Yeah. Often with someone who has very strong Mars and they're dealing with someone who doesn't, they just don't know how to manage that energy and they don't know how to respond. And this actually makes the affliction worse, I think, because if you can imagine you're having a fight, the last thing that you want is the person who you're fighting with is to run away or not fight back. Yes, I mean, of course you want to manage the fight. You don't want it to go out of control. But when you have a balanced energy with Mars in your chart, and it's getting balanced because the other person also has that affliction, then even if your particular fight, your particular argument spirals out of control, then the person who has that affliction in their chart will not take it so personally. And this is why they say that people who have a Mars, it's called Manglik Dosh, people who have this in their chart should be with someone who also has it. It doesn't matter if they're not fighting, or whether they are fighting, or when they're fighting. That doesn't matter. The energy is there, and that's enough. A person who has that strongly in their chart, they will just exude that. Even it doesn't have to come from words. So that's one thing to bear in mind with a Mars affliction. Now, the final obstacle to relationship is in fact the Sun. Yeah, though compared to the others that I've talked about, it's the least harmful. Because the nature of the Sun is in fact sattvic. So its primary motivation is to do good, is positive. But the Sun can lead a person who is to become too individualistic in a relationship, too independent, similar to Mars, seeking their higher purpose at the expense of the relationship, right? I mean, we all know those people who put their primary goals, whether it's career goals or personal goals, above their marriage or above their relationship. And in pursuit of that, they end up neglecting the relationship. They also tend to be very righteous if there's a strong Sun presence in the chart. Remember, the Sun is the life force, and there can be no life without it on this universe. In fact, all of the planets revolve around the Sun, and therefore it creates that kind of energy in a chart. If someone has a very strong Sun, it could also be someone who's a Leo Lagna, who strong, the Sun is their Lagna Lord. Unless it's debilitated, that is going to certainly make a strong presence. So for this reason, the Sun person is not very concerned about others as much as it is about itself, about its own goals, its own purpose in life, even at the cost of relationships. And of course, we all know when planets get too close to the Sun, they get combust. So this combustion essentially signifies destruction. When Venus is too close, then it impacts all relationships, not just your marriage. The person can be too selfish. And when the Moon is too close, it basically means that the Moon is very dark and not operating in strength. So again, the Sun dominates. Yeah. In this way, the Sun can operate as an obstacle to relationships, as it can create the dance between me versus us. So what's the solution then? Yes, you guessed it. It's Jupiter's placement and how it's impacting these challenging energies in the chart by aspect or position. A dignified Venus, of course, helps to balance this out. And an unafflicted Moon A moon in strength. So basically, what does that mean? That means as close to full as it can get is what you want. Now, so Jupiter is what? Jupiter basically represents knowledge. It represents spirituality. So suppose you have a Manglik dosh, as we talked about, with the affliction of Mars in your chart, and it's quite severe. And this is where you have Mars causing the biggest obstacle in the relationship. But on the other hand, you have a daily spiritual practice. So what this will essentially do is it will create the awareness, calm the mind, and look beyond all the competition and rivalry that Mars denotes, leading to separation. And if the moon is well placed, then the water element will bring an emotional substance to the relationship. The ability to be at peace with oneself and be content with what or whom you have in your life. Now, if you note, the moon is strongest in its own sign, which is the watery Cancer sign. Venus is also strongest in water. It gets exalted in Pisces. And Jupiter, similarly, gets exalted in Cancer, which is again a water sign. So if you have some of these blocks, these obstacles to relationships in your chart, and especially if you're experiencing the troubled planets dasha, that's quite key. But on the other hand, you have sufficient water energy in your chart. For instance, you have the Sun, Moon, and Lagna in a water sign, or just generally you have enough planets in water sign, then it will alleviate some of these issues that you would face, yeah? Okay, so now by increasing the water element and decreasing the fire element is basically the key to harmonious relationships. And this will of course not be a quick fix, and nor will it come naturally to those with prominent fire placements. But it's the first step in clearing these obstacles. I've done remedy videos on the Moon and Venus, so I would say check that out. But again, I'm going to reiterate here something that I have mentioned numerous times, is that you must cultivate a daily, disciplined spiritual practice. Doubly important if you are in a dasha of one of the planets that are presenting obstacles in relationships. I also suggest, of course, daily mantra japa if it suits you and if it brings results. You have to see. Occasional fasting ritual will also bring good results, as fasting is something that not only heals the body, but also heals the mind. Remember, fasting need not be no food at all. You can also try fasting by eating only fruits. And if you do have a meal, then avoid salt on the days that you fast. Now, when it comes to remedies, there is really no simple, easy solution. For some people, mantras bring really strong results, and for others, meditation or kriya does that. And yet others, seva and donation is the best remedy. So you have to experiment here and see what works for you, as long as it's done with faith and devotion. I'm sure you will see results. Thanks, folks.